All right, gentlemen, here we are at the Wood Technology Center. Glad you could join us today. We've got our friend Dave Borgatti, instructor, longtime friend of Dunn Lumber. And we've got you with us from Milwaukee Tool. So thanks for joining us, you.
Thank you.
It looks like we have a beautiful piece of cordless equipment in front of us today. Your tabletop table saw. You want to run us through some of the features and benefits of this tool?
Absolutely, I would love to. So this is our new Milwaukee M18 cordless 8 1/4 table saw. The great thing about this table saw is that it has a few different features that will help provide the user with more portability, more accessibility, and hopefully make them more productive on the job site. One of the great things about this tool as well is it's also integrated with OneKey. So you can track, manage, and customize the tool to your liking. Now you can't necessarily customize the tool to where you can turn it on and off remotely, but you can track the tool, know its location. You can see the sale history, and etc. And we can dive into that a little more later on if you like. Another feature of this saw is that it has a 24.5-inch extended table that you can adjust, whereas some other table saws might not have that. The other feature as well is on a 12 amp hour battery, you're gonna actually get 600 linear feet of cutting on this table saw.
Well, you, beautiful tool, thanks for bringing this. Dave, I was hoping you could kind of share a little bit about maybe some of the common uses on the typical job site for this type of tool.
Sure. I mean, for a finished carpenter, it's a dream. It's small, it's light enough. I often have to bring things upstairs. So you bring a large table saw upstairs and you pay for it. This one's light enough that you can go up and down all day. Again, no power requirements because you have a battery. I believe it or not, I've seen this in all sorts of locations, even up on roofs. You know, they put a little jig to keep it level, but they've been able to do some ripping up there too, which is a pretty rare thing. Yeah. Hardwood flooring installers would love this. And they will often put it like on casters and they'll bring it around with them. Again, because it's so portable, it changes everything.
Yeah, I love that. Could you remind us again, uses for this versus where you would pull out your track saw with respect to sheet goods?
Well, the big thing here is you don't, doing large pieces of, even let's say it's a lower cabinet, okay? So you got something roughly 24 by 32 or something like that. This really is not made for that kind of work. And a track saw is going to give you a much straighter cut. Here's a good example. I don't care if it's on a stationary saw, a big 3.5 horse stationary saw, and if I'm ripping a sheet of plywood, I can always get a straighter cut with a track saw than I can even with in-feed and out-feed support on a big saw, because you're trying to keep it against that fence. Yeah. But that track saw is wonderful. So a lot of times what will happen for a saw like this is you will break panels down with the track saw, and then you'll come here and do the final cuts.
Makes sense. Dave, could you talk a little bit about the piece behind the blade there, what that is and what it does?
This is a really, really interesting point. For this, you notice this is our throat plate here. And I'm gonna stand up here and just bring this over you. This is our standard basket style guard that most of our, let's see, I believe, there we go. And for this one, if I remember right, it's under there? Okay.
Is it quick release?
It's quick release, so you can, and this is great because there's no tools required, Jim. And what happens is you can either have the riving knife in, or you could have this basket style guard. You have to have the throat plate in first.
Yep.
Okay, there
Perfect. There we go, and then we'll lock it in.
All right. There are a couple of things about this, and I go back and forth. I always tell the students to use a guard when it's safe to do so, which means when this is up close to here, it's not safe. You can't get your hand behind there. And if you're ripping really thin strips, literally a push stick won't fit in there too. So basically, anything greater than a fist is a big thing for us. A fist is clear. We wouldn't use a guard. All right, now, I know that's antithetical for a lot of people, but for me, this is really big. These guards are much larger than, say, the larger saw stop guards, which are only 35 millimeters wide, about 1.5 inches wide. And then the other thing that they've done, and if you would be kind enough to retract that.
Absolutely.
And let's go ahead and put this one right back in. show you what's going on. So this is your basic garden splitter. Now these are anti-kickback pawls, and they're spring-loaded. And the reason that we don't like it is if you are doing nothing but ripping at 90 degrees, they're functional. But the minute you do a bevel, they hang up. Okay? So it's actually the very first thing that I take off of here is this. Now the garden splitter, you know, by law you have to have these on site and everything, and it goes with it, the saw. But it inhibits, you know, the ability to look at what's going on in the blade. And if you're taking off like a 30-second or something, these things really do get in the way. So the thing that we recommend more than a garden splitter, and definitely not these, the thing that we recommend is the riving knife. And the reason we recommend the riving knife is as you're pushing a piece of wood through, I know it's going to sound funny, but most of the injuries are not from the blade or getting cut. Most of the injuries are from a kickback. And the kickback happens when you engage the back of the blade. But if you have a knife behind it, which splits, it will make sure that you can't engage the back of the blade. And what's very cool about this is this riving knife top is just under top dead center of the blade. So if you needed to make a rabbet, you could make a through cut, flip it, make another through cut, and it wouldn't interfere. Whereas if you have a splitter has to keep both pieces through. In other words, it has to be a rip.
Yeah.
So that's why I really like the riving knife. It was new with the saw stops that we got in first, and now it's on every tool. It's a really big safety feature, especially for a job site saw. What I like about this is it's a very thin riving knife. Mine's very thick, so I have to have an 1/8 of an inch thick blade, which for a small saw, which is basically just a circular saw turned upside down, it depowers it. Now what they've done here by having a very thin curved blade, a little over a 1/16, and a thin riving knife, is they've allowed the saw to be able to cut and not take away so much wood. So it'll keep the RPMs up, you get a cleaner cut.
Yeah.
So nice job with you.
Yeah, nice design. Well, gentlemen, you guys have really pointed out some super nice features on this tool. You do have a couple other things you want to show us?
Absolutely. There's a few other features on this saw, and I'm going to go ahead and turn the table saw. That way you guys can see it. One of the features I wanted to point out was that not only do we have a 24.5-inch length adjustable stock here for you to be able to cut any type of wood that you want on here, but it also has a quick break and lock. That way you can easily adjust between cuts.
That's nice.
The other thing that we also built into this table saw, it's on the back here, is a easy compartment for the blade change wrench. So a lot of times people will lose this wrench and they'll lose it either in the back of their truck or lose it around their shop. We built an easy way to store it right on the inside of the saw. That way it will not go anywhere and you know exactly where it is. The last feature that we also built into this table saw to ensure that you have everything that you need stored compactly is a spot to put your rip guard as well.
Okay.
Right down here.
This is really nice when you're moving it in and out of the truck, Jim.
Yeah.
To get everything into this kind of roll cage setup really makes sense.
I like it. Dave, could you maybe show us how the blade adjusts on a miter, and maybe also the, what do you call this piece here?
Well, this is actually the miter gauge. Now, this is, Hugh and I were talking about this before. You know, it's obviously small, it's plastic. You can put a fence on it. There are 2 holes to screw a piece of wood there. In point of fact, no one uses it, and the reason is that you always have a miter saw on site.
Gotcha.
And if you'll notice, because you don't have a lot of room between the blade and the fence, you know, maybe you could do 4-inch wide pieces. That will be about it.
Okay.
So this I kind of consider as sort of vestigial. You're not really going to use it. There may be a timing when you would use it, but it does point out one thing that's really important in use. And we'll just bring it up right now in the slot. A lot of people will want to cut, and let's say that they'll move the fence to, you know, 7 inches, and they'll lock the fence down. And what they'll do is they'll put a piece of wood in here and they'll cut this way. And that is the most deadly way to cut that we know, because the piece is trapped between the blade and the fence. So what we say here, and it doesn't matter if you're in one of the big boys or if you're in a job site saw, you only use 1 fence. Either you're using this as a fence or you're using the rip fence, but you never use two fences at the same time.
That's a great tip. I know in the segment we did on the miter saw, or compound miter saw, we talked about the idea of they're getting transported in and out of the truck, back and forth the job, maybe 5-6 times a week. Can a tool like this get out of calibration, or is it pretty protected?
In my experience, they're pretty bomb-proof. And again, it's that roll cage effect, so you keep everything inside. You can see where the handles are. It's easy to grab. The one thing, and we'll show it when we do the setup, is that we always check the fence. So the fence is the one that can get, it's a very light piece of aluminum. Again, you're trying to keep the whole saw light. And it doesn't transport in this fashion. The fence is actually down below, and it's in that roll cage. So hopefully it won't get bumped around. Okay. This is a rack and pinion system here and everything. It's really nice. You can see the scale is very easy to read. Yeah. So, we all, a carpenter really appreciates that. And it's one of the first things we do in setup. So the most delicate part of this whole operation is this fence. And we'll show you at the time, but the most important thing is when you take this out of the truck, you set this up on the stand and you're ready, before you plug it, before you put a battery in, the first thing you do is you check the parallelism, and we'll go ahead and do that a little bit later.
Now that you spun the saw around you, I've got a different vantage point here. It looks like there might be another removable piece here. Could you tell us what this does?
Yeah, absolutely. So we also have built in a stick storage. That way, when you are ripping boards and you're done ripping boards, you have an easy way to be able to store. It just goes in right here and locks in. That way, again, that roll cage affects everything is compact and able to be boxed in. To be able to take this guard out or fence out as well, it's extremely easy. All you do is you lift levers on the sides, and then you'll be able to take this right off, flip it the other way down, like so. But that locks in, and then now you have a fully ready to go, transportable table saw.
That's great.
And ready to stack other boxes on top of it.
Yeah.
Yep.
That is true.
Now, there's another piece also on the fence. I'm sorry that you did that. Can we flip that fence around again, please?
Absolutely.
And I was going to ask you too, guys, can you set it up where the fence slides and extends to the left if you're left-handed? And you're more comfortable with the push stick in your left hand?
Yeah, okay. Jim, this is a big safety point. We never put the fence on the left. The saw stops that we have behind us and everything, you can do that. It's just plain dangerous. And I'll explain when we set this saw up. A lot of times what you'll do is you'll have a blade and you'll have a fence, and the fence may be canted a little bit out, okay, maybe a 32nd of an inch. As you push something through, there's more space at the back of the blade, and it's okay. If you flip that fence over, now you've got a pinch going on. So generally, we don't put it on the other side. Some people do, but I found there's been more accidents when people mount the fence on the left side. But you can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
In addition to the push stick, Dave, it looks like there's another piece of aluminum here. Is this?
And Jim, if you'd be kind enough to flip that piece over.
Oh.
And then what happens is it's dead in line or dead flat with a table, and it will support like a piece of plywood as you're going through.
Okay. And you're all the way out, past this, you're wider here.
Yep.
Very smart.
Now, having said that, and we'll show it later, this is one thing that's really, really important. That aluminum piece right there is called a rip fence, not a crosscut fence. So if you can imagine, if you had something narrow and wide, it would be easy to get away from that. And it becomes very dangerous. So what we recommend is ripping only in a rip fence and cross-cutting, and cross-cutting with whatever saws you have on site too. Again, as you were saying, if you've got a chop saw with a 13-inch travel, you can do quite a bit. Anything wider than that anyway, you're probably going to be using a track saw or something like that.
Gotcha. I know, Dave, you and I did a segment on circular saw blades, which was fabulous. Saw like this, is there always pretty much a certain style of blade on it? Maybe it's thinner or thicker, but...
Well, I'll bet that's probably about a 24 tooth. at any rate, with this one, it's a neat blade. And if you remember, Jim, when we were talking, this little bump behind here is an anti-kickback pawl. What it does is it limits the amount of wood that can go into that gullet. So it helps with the kickbacks. And again, it's a very thin curve. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so this is a 24 tooth blade, okay? So really, it's a fairly standard blade. It's an average. One of the things you would want to get an 8 1/4 rip blade. You would want to get an 8 1/4 crosscut blade if you're doing a lot of plywood work. Okay.
Okay, guys. So should we do some cutting?
I think so.
All right.
Sounds
Set
good.
her up.
Well, gentlemen, looks like we're on pack. We're going to get this thing on the stand and get going.
We are going to get this thing in the stand.
All right.
So if you give me a hand, I'm just going to clip it in there. This, by the way, is a very nice stand because
set.
after you get done, you can lift it up and move it from place to place too. I love the fact that it clips.
I noticed you had an adjustment there too, Dave, if you had an uneven
Yeah,
floor.
so if you had an uneven floor, of course, it'll settle on 3 legs and you just put out that 4th leg. So very nice setup, I have to say. Now, the number one thing missing here, is outfeed support. So since we don't have outfeed support from Milwaukee, I'll show you what I use in the meantime. It's just a quick bump. And then as a piece goes over, it actually gets supported. It's nice to check that with the board, make sure that we're pretty much in line. It can be a little bit down, and you can see, but this will just, as it hits it, you just roll right in.
Gotcha.
So that's good, that's important.
Dave, with a smaller portable saw like that, is there a formula for how close or how far you keep the support away?
It's going to depend on what you're cutting. Okay, we're cutting some pretty small stuff, so we could actually move that farther out. If you were cutting sheet goods or something, which you really shouldn't be doing on the saw, but if you were cutting longer pieces, you know, you'd move it farther. This is why I like continuous outfeed support, and I'll show you later, Jim, another way to do that too. Now, we've got the saw all set up, and you'll notice that it's got its battery in, so it's live. And it's got a switch protected by a cover, which I like a lot. So let me show you the switch. So it's on, great thing. If you get in trouble, you can just knee it. And that is a wonderful, wonderful safety point. A lot of the small benchtop saws don't have that, because that means that if you get in trouble and you've got your hand on the piece, you can just knee it. And that should be on all saws.
That's a great point.
So that's a really big thing. Now, you've got a couple of different things. You've got, of course, this blade raise, and it's a nice geared blade raise. So you really have a lot of control on that one too. And then you have another lever here, and this will adjust your bevel tilt. And this gets to be a really big thing. You know, no one does it anymore, so maybe not even be worthwhile talking about, but if you'll notice, it's a blade left bevel. That's really important because in the old unisaws, it used to go this way, and that trapped whatever it was that you had under there, and you can get into a serious world of hurt. But I don't know any that don't tilt blade left, but that's great. Now, one of the things here is we're not mitering, okay? We're not going to use the miter gauge. We're going to pretend that we have a miter saw. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a cut. We're going to set it to a 0 bevel. So the bevel is the blade tilting, and we're going to make sure that it's there. So I'll go in like this, and there's a stop. There's literally a physical stop that I'm going against. And what happens when you get into, and you're doing a lot of woodworking, is that stop can be obstructed by a bunch of wood dust.
Oh.
Wood dust can get in there. These saws are not great at dust collection. You really want a very large dust extractor. They generate a lot of dust. I've seen bags put under them and that sort of thing. They're a hard one to collect. It does have a nice dust shroud, but you would need a fairly good sized port on the other side to take the dust away. So what we're going to do now is we're going to check it, a couple of different things. I'm going to take the battery out so I can do some playing here first. The most important thing, apart from the blade being the correct blade, we're going to assume this is the correct blade for the kind of ripping we're going to do. If I was doing a lot of plywood work, I'd want one with more teeth. And the really big thing is you want to make sure that the throat plate is level with the table. If it's down, then as you push something through, it can actually run around that line there and push it into the blade. And the other thing is we have the riving knife there and it's dead in line with the blade. This is a problem for transport sometimes. Sometimes someone doesn't take down the blade and everything and the riving knife gets bent, okay? They're fairly inexpensive. Honestly, when I bought a saw like this, I would buy another riving knife because I've seen too many accidents with that. The other thing that's really big for me is when you're using this saw on site, blades down. If you're going to cut, that's great. But when you leave this saw, bring the blade down. That way, no matter what, no one's going to, even if it's off, you can still cut yourself pretty well. And I've seen that happen before. So people that leave the blade up is really kind of crazy. The other thing, Jim, when we're looking at something like this, and we're just going to go ahead and set it up for a rip here. We'll check it out, is how high the blade is over the stock, okay? 1/4 of an inch. Okay. And roughly 1 carbide tooth. So if you have 1 tooth over, you're good to go. Now, like in everything else in woodworking, there's exceptions, okay? So here's a good exception. I cut a lot of thin material, and as we saw in pattern making, you can do some 1/8 inch door skin. And if you were to do this, it would be one of the most dangerous cuts you ever did. Because as you fed this in, it would porpoise right up over the top of the blade. So I know this sounds like I'm violating my own rule, but when you're cutting very thin stuff, you raise it a couple inches above. Otherwise, what happens, you tend to porpoise right over. Okay. And for a job site saw like this, you'll be cutting all manner of materials in all different thicknesses too. So let me just take this away for a second. But the 1/4 inch rule is what we use here at school, and we think it's really good. Now I'm going to take this piece of poplar, which I know is flat. I'm checking it on the table, okay? And what I want to do is I want to check the bevel tilt. And what I'll do is raise this about 1/4 inch over. It's going to do two things at the same time. I am going to go for 2 inches. And what I'm doing is, not only am I checking the bevel tilt, I'm checking to make sure the fence is accurate. And the wonderful part about these fences, all you have to do is loosen that screw and move it one way or the other. So we'll set it to exactly 2 inches. We'll lock the fence down. We have about 1/4 inch clear right there, and we're all set to go. Okay, now we'll put the battery back in. Now, this is their push stick. It's great in a pinch. I'm really glad that it's part of it, but I think they're dangerous. So what we use instead are ones where you can actually push down, okay? So we'll leave that there, and I always leave a push stick on top of a table. In fact, I never leave the saw without a push stick there available, because if it's not there, someone will say, oh, I just need to make one cut. And that's woodworkers' famous last words, okay? So now, and this is really important. A lot of people will push until the two pieces come apart and stop. And what happens is this piece of wood is really close to the edge of the blade. There's so much vibration that it often just comes back and hits you. Now, we do have a riving knife, so we're protected. So whenever we're on a table saw, we push past the throat plate, and we never have any worries of the wood coming back at all, okay? Smart. So what I'll do now is I'll check that for bevel. So we'll take our square. Yep, and we're on, okay? If it's not, I'll adjust that bevel. Now, the most important thing is kind of like a miter saw. Once you've got it at 90 degrees and you know it's accurate, 22.5 is accurate too. But if you don't get that correct and you set it to 30, it's going to be 30 plus or minus something that you don't want. So I did want to measure this and check that it is actually 2 inches. That I needed to do as well. So I'll get my tape measure over here. Right on, okay?
Right on.
So if it wasn't right on, it's a very simple thing to turn this and simply move that cursor until you get it dead on.
So that's your minor adjustment
Yeah,
to get
minor
right
adjustment
before you get going.
But it's the first thing you want to do before you start ripping anything is you want to make sure that A, you got a zero bevel, and B, that this is all dialed in.
Are you not marking?
I don't
You're
want
not
to
marking your
take out
piece.
the
You're
tape
trusting the
measure.
saw.
Yep,
That's
exactly.
great. That's
so you're not only setting up the saw correctly, but the most important thing is you don't have to measure. You can read this scale really nicely. And by the way, I like the way the scale is graduated or divided. It's divided into 16ths. So it's accurate to a 32nd, which I fight with people about all the time. Because if you have a mark at a 16th and another mark at another 16th, in between is a 32nd. So you are perfectly fine. It's an easy scale to read. And fortunately, the inch portion of the scale is done really, really well, very clearly with black on white. And then this is important. I'm going to actually take the riving knife out for it. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up for a number, in this case, 4 inches. And I'm going to grab my tape measure, and I'm going to pick one tooth, Jim, okay? It doesn't matter which way it's leaning, but take this one tooth, and I'm going to set it for 4, and then I'm going to take that same tooth, and I'm going to measure it in the back and check that this is exactly parallel. Now, for a lot of cabinet makers, what they'll do is they'll actually move the fence out of alignment so there's a 32nd more back here. I don't do that. I try to keep everything dead parallel, and it's really easy to do, but you do have to take the same tooth, move that back, and measure it here. All right?
That's a great tip.
And so that way you know when this comes out of the job box or when it comes off the truck or something like that, that you've got a safe tool to work with. So this saw is all set up to go. Let's show you what one beef is. If you took a piece of material like this and you were to cut it, this is a rip. But if on the other hand, you do this, it's a crosscut. And what happens is it's so easy to come away from that. That what we tell you is this is a rip fence. It is not meant for crosscuts. Plus it's a very light saw, so you really would not want to do this. It doesn't stop people from doing it, they'll do it anyway. But in this case, it would be better with a track saw on a square to be able to just take that off. So I really think of this, Jim, as a ripping tool.
Gotcha.
And this thing just lifts out of the way, so it's out of your way. Nice setup. Let's try it in something a little longer.
I know that saw is built to cut something obviously fairly wide. Do you have a rule, if you're on a job site, do you have a rule of thumb, table saw like that? I'm not going to cut anything wider than 8 inches or...
If there were a pair of us on site, I may literally have you behind me, tailing me to get me in, and then moving over to the other side, all right? Better to have an outfeed support, and sometimes infeed. I've used that often. I have 2 of them, and use one for infeed support too. The way things are on site now, you tend to be working alone. It's not the best way, but this is what we do. So if you're working alone, and also if you ask for help, it's considered unmanly, which is totally ridiculous. But so I ask for help a lot. All right, so on something like this, set it up. Again, bring the blade down to 1/4 of an inch. Now, this is a big one. Thank you. I'm going to use these 2 to show you. What will happen is, and I don't know if you could see this, Jim, as I was going through, what I'll do is I'll move this up, and my fingers will be here. My thumb is pushing down, my finger is pushing in, okay? And I'll just move this small piece away. The left hand never feeds. Never, ever feeds. The left hand is merely a clamp, and it never passes the line of the throat plate. We tell students this all the time because this way, you know, if all of a sudden, oh, there's something going on over here, I know exactly where my hand is. Yeah. Also, I'm keeping it into the fence and I'm keeping it down flat on the table. And then when I come up here, oh, I hit something. And at this point, if it's greater than a fist, I can simply go like that. But if it's less than a fist, I'm going to reach for the push stick and go. But the left hand never goes past the throat plate, ever. The only exception would be if you've got a very large piece of plywood and then your hands are well away from the blade. But for ripping smaller strips and everything else, that left hand never feeds.
Great. Dave, I know when we were sitting down earlier, we talked about a few safety tips, but you want to touch on a couple more here?
Sure. Let's say, and as most carpenters, you don't have a riving knife, okay? So this is a big one. I'm going to go ahead and unplug our thing. And by the way, one thing I didn't do that I always do, the minute I've unplugged or taken the thing away, try turning it on, okay? Because it could have been like you could have a three-way there and you could have unplugged the wrong tool. So the first thing you do is try to turn it on again. If you know it doesn't turn on, life is good. Because I'm about to get my hands near the blades and everything. What I'm going to do is do what most finished carpenters do. And, take this out. You said it's right back here?
Yep, here we go.
Thank you. And I'm going to take the riving knife out. Now, in the old days, what would happen is we didn't use guards, we didn't use splitters, which meant a week after we trained everyone in table saw, it was white knuckles and we were just like, really, really nervous. And one of the reasons is, as you're pushing a piece of wood through and you're getting close to the end, you're like, and you're looking at the blade, and you should never look at the blade. We say glance at the blade, but stare at the fence. And Jim, if you come over, I'll show you. As you're going through, the minute it gaps at the back there, you've engaged the back of the blade and you will get a kickback, which is why the riving knife is such a wonderful, wonderful addition to a table saw. So even now, as I'm feeding in, I'm always looking, my eyes are always staring at the fence. If it went like this, you'd be in trouble, which is another reason no warped lumber should ever go on this. As funny as it sounds, a portable circular saw is a lot safer with a line. You snap a line with a chalk line and you cut it with a portable circular saw. There's not going to be any problem with binding or anything like that. But here, if that gaps from the back of that fence, you're going to be wearing that piece of wood. Okay. Which is why, again, the riving knife is a really nice thing. All right, you're going to show me how to do this. Is it right back? I got it. Yep, got it. Thank you.
You like that?
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay, and we'll lock that in. And you do want to lock the fence down so it doesn't move.
Gotcha.
Okay. The other thing, which is really nice, you've got, I think it's a 3mm Allen wrench, and you can bring this up and down. That's usually once you do that, you don't have to check it again, but that throat plate's got to be flat, and it's got to be in there, and you can never tell who's had it. So, okay. Okay, Jim, you asked me about other safety things. I'll show you one right here, and that is that after I cut here, and I've done this, what a lot of people will do, drop that they'll reach across the blade and move the offcut. You never, ever, ever, ever reach across the blade. You do this, but you never reach across the blade. That's where more accidents have happened. You'll even see people with that offcut, they'll do this with the push stick, but a lot of times they'll involve the push stick into the table saw blade, and I've seen that happen where it actually kicks it right back at them. So you never reach across a blade path at all. That's why they paint these red.
Yeah.
You know, and they're trying to tell you, danger, Will Robinson. Don't get near that blade and don't cross that blade path.
That's a great tip, Dave. Well, thank you again for bringing the tool out today. Another beautiful piece of equipment. Dave, for your expertise and showing us how to use it efficiently and most importantly, safely. So thank you guys. Good day.
No problem.